I'm reading a book called Disinformation, done by the biggest Soviet defector in the history of the Cold War. He came out in 1978, I think, and he's written a new book about disinformation, on how disinformation works and what the Soviet Union has been really up to, and what they're doing and what Putin is doing. I'm telling you, it will change the way you view almost everything. Really quite a terrifying book. We'll have one of the authors on with us, I believe tomorrow, on tomorrow's broadcast. You don't want to miss it.
All right. I spent some time this weekend reading a new book called Disinformation. It is by Mike Pacepa. Is that right? Pacepa, okay. And Ron Ryschlock. General Pacepa was the highest-ranking spy chief from the Soviet bloc to ever defect. I mean, there was nobody even close in this category. And he came over in 1978 and defected in the height of Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter wouldn't listen to him, and instead decided to listen to all the Soviets. And then Ronald Reagan got into office and started listening to the good general, and that changed the course of history. Ronald Reagan was listening, and now we have another Jimmy Carter in office. When you read this book, Disinformation, it will change your perspective on just about everything that you think you know in history. Ron, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Glenn. It's great to be here.
Can you tell me, first of all, tell me a little bit about the general, because he's in hiding, has been in hiding since he defected.
He's an amazing man. He was like the number 2 or number 3 guy in Romania when it was communist under Ceausescu. He was the head of the equivalent of their CIA, if you want to think of it that way. And he watched and he saw from the inside how they built up the false leadership, the false greatness of Ceausescu and other communist leaders, how they implanted. What he says is fascinating. Disinformation. You think of spies and you think of stealing ideas, but that's not where the real harm comes from. The worst harm is implanting false ideas. You implant doubt. You cause people to question their values, their beliefs. By tearing down Western values, you create a vacuum that allows Marxist thought to expand into.
It's fascinating to me because he talked about disinformation in a way of going to unlike propaganda. Propaganda is like Russia today. We know that's coming from Russia. But disinformation is going through a trusted source. So they find sources that they can give and plant this information with.
Yeah, precisely. And when you know it's coming from your enemy, you distrust it. It's not going to be of value to you. If they can get it to come in the United States, if it comes from Washington, if it comes from, at least when it used to be what came from the New York Times or one of those sources, people tended to believe it. We're starting to be suspicious of those today, but they tried to intentionally implant false ideas into trusted sources. It was actually developed as a science in the Soviet sphere of intelligence, and there were certain points. You had to have a kernel of truth at the bottom of it, something that you could kind of hang your hat on. But that's way more persuasive than anything that would have come out of the Kremlin.
So let me give a couple of examples, because I find these examples to be absolutely fascinating. When you hear these, you will say, oh, yeah, well, I've heard that before. That probably is true. 1, Hitler's Pope. This is fascinating and terrifying about how disinformation can absolutely destroy someone, even after they're dead.
Well, yeah, Glenn. I mean, I have written books about it. Was Pope Pius XII. The guy was Pope during World War II, who, by the way, was recognized as a hero during the war, after the war, at the time of his death. Letters from Jewish leaders around the world. A concert was played at the Vatican by the symphony from Israel, and tributed thanks of everything he had done.
They saved They saved Jews in Rome. The church, the Vatican, had Jewish families living in the stairwells and the hallways of the Vatican.
Absolutely, and everyone knew that, and that was not really doubted until the 1960s. And in the 1960s, there was an active campaign. There was a play that was at the heart of it, but the play wasn't the only thing. There were books, there were lectures, there were speakers, there were articles implanted. And you know what? It's not because they cared about the Pope. It's because they cared about Western values. If you take down a pope, if you associate a pope with the Nazis, well, how can you trust that church? How can you trust Christianity itself? How can you really trust religion at some levels?
And they tried to take him down when he was alive, but it couldn't penetrate. And he was against communism. He was against fascism. He was against anybody kind of coming in and telling people exactly how to live their life like that. So he was against both of them. And the communists needed to get the Catholics and break the Catholics apart.
They absolutely did. And in fact, we saw this in the new nations where the Soviet Union now had influence: Poland, Croatia, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. In almost every one of those nations, the leaders of the Catholic Church, at first the Soviets kind of sided up to them and said, hey, they were against the Nazis, we're against the Nazis. After 2 or 3 years, they were arrested, they were put on trial, they were convicted of having collaborated with the Nazis, and trumped up charges. In almost every case now, the prosecutors came forward and said, yeah, we manufactured evidence, we made stuff up. And most people knew it at the time in the West. But they took that same basic idea and extrapolated, stumbling over my words here, and did it against the Pope. And it's all, again, it's not really because they cared about the Pope. It's because they cared about the Catholic Church, Christianity, religion itself.
Okay, so there's one example. The other example is we have always heard that the CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Explain that disinformation campaign. And this is now proven in documents.
Well, it's fascinating here. It's happened about the same time that the campaign against Pope Pius XII happened. And it really kind of the same people. And we traced the fund sources, the same people who tried to say the Pope was too nice to the Nazis, said, it was the CIA who killed President Kennedy. The Soviets were very concerned, very interested about Lee Harvey Oswald when he went over to the Soviet Union. People today say, oh, they didn't care. They knew he was a flake or whatever. Are you kidding me? A Marine who taught himself Russian, who worked in some very secure areas in terms of our flights and stuff.
Because I have heard that from the best of the best, that they just didn't care about him.
That's because they bought the disinformation. The disinformation says, we didn't care about this guy. Of course we ignored him. Well, the Soviet Union went into high gear to sell that story and to point in every different direction, particularly at the CIA, but in every different direction so we wouldn't look too hard at what is a very logical and a lot of evidence points to some role of the Soviet Union. And we go into that in the book and how they worked with it.
It is absolutely fascinating because it opens your eyes. Now let's skip ahead to how does disinformation play a role in Benghazi?
Well, disinformation begins within a nation, and it's all about building up the current leader, criticizing the previous leader. And you have to control the flow of information to do that, and you implant, false ideas. Benghazi, what do we have? We have a false story coming from our government, coming from a trusted source. They cared about this video. I was teaching a course in terrorism and the law when this all happened. I came into my class that next morning, and I said, let's pull up this video. We pulled up the video, and in 30 seconds, I said, turn it off. This isn't it. It was clear. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw that video.
Oh, I did. It was there's no way that caused.
There's anything. No way.
No way it caused anything but laughter.
Exactly. I mean, it was a preposterous show, and my students knew that. We all knew this couldn't be it, and yet that's the line we get from our government. I mean, a trusted source pushing us in a different direction, so we don't notice, in fact, what's happening. I mean, and then you end up with the hearings where what does it matter? Becomes the mantra from our Secretary of State.
How much trouble do you think, and does the general think, the United States of America is in?
We think, I believe I can speak for him. He and I communicate every day, that it is in a lot of trouble, but it's not lost, that there is still a chance.
What needs to happen for it to not be lost?
People, well, you need to wake up. And those who are awake, and there are a lot of, I grew up in Indiana, I live in Mississippi, a lot of people I know who are awake and are in touch, and here in Texas, the same thing, have to be willing to speak up, have to be willing to risk a raised eyebrow across a cocktail party or something.
I will tell you this makes me it makes me optimistic to see how many people are awake, and then it makes me pessimistic to see how many are not willing to sacrifice their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They're not even willing to risk being unpopular. And if you're not willing to risk being unpopular, when things get really tough, when they start bullying you in the streets, nobody comes. We watched this video, Pat, with a guy. Remember the guy getting beaten on the bus the other day? Mm-hmm. And there was this guy, this bus driver, that was getting just beaten with an inch of his life on the bus. There were people on the bus. Nobody did anything.
Stood clear in the back of the bus.
Stood clear. And I
waited it out.
I saw that and I thought, that is the way you win a country. That's the way you just take over a country, that you don't have no courage left in the country.
I mean, that is the part too. It's being awake and it's having courage. People do have to step up, and it's not usually physical courage we're talking about. I mean, your example may be, but a lot of times it's risking unpopularity, risking being associated. Oh, you're one of those people.
Yeah,
I am. One of my favorite things. Sometimes we'll say, well, some people believe this, and I say, yeah, I do. And which almost always shuts the person down. It's kind of fun.
It is true.
Now,
it is true.
Ron, does the general believe this is still going on? Is Russia still a threat the way Mitt Romney said they were during the campaign, and he was mocked, and now here we are on the verge of war in the Ukraine?
Yeah. Break this up in two places. Let's talk about the Ukraine, and then let's talk about the Middle East.
Sure. Well, in the Ukraine, yes, of course. There's a saying that the bear never leaves where he has placed his paw. And Putin clearly wants Crimea. There's the oil and gas lines. There's the coast. And he's been emboldened. He knows that there's not going to be any serious consequence here. And I think we all know it. And I'm not calling for, and neither would the general call for, a military strike here, which basically means you're going to capitulate. But how do we get to the point where he knew that there would be no response? He got there because along the way, there have been little steps here and there and there and there. And you realize, if you think about presidents, have we had a strong leader in office?
No.
Who are our strong leaders? Mm-hmm. And when there are strong leaders, people don't get emboldened.
What does he think about? The president, our president, saying to Medvedev, "I'll have more room to navigate after this election"? What does he think about that? What is happening there?
I haven't specifically asked him. I can tell you pretty much. I mean, it's clearly. It was an indication, let me get reelected and we'll play nice with you. And it was, I think.
Is there anything more going on, does he think that, I mean, remember when the press never followed this up? The president was just lost for an hour over in Moscow. And it came out that he had, because Putin said it, that he had schooled the president on the true history of the Cold War. And no one ever followed up on, Mr. President, what did you learn in that? What exactly was said in that meeting? Nobody ever said a word about that. So what's happening here? Because I think our president is likely to listen to that point of view, much more likely to listen to that point of view than my point of view. on the United States of America?
Well, it may well be. I think it's interesting now after the movements into Ukraine. We're hearing from the White House that, well, this isn't 21st century. This is 19th. This is 18th century kind of stuff. No, not so much. I mean, this is the world. This is human nature. This is there are people who want to take things from us.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things I think about the book. There really are bad people, and we try to live in a world, and people. I think from Washington, you hear this. It's people are civilized, and if I'm nice and we have a cup of cappuccino, we can make everybody get along. But no, there really are bad actors on the world stage.
I want to talk to you tonight. We're going to talk some more. I really kind of want to get into our own Secretary of State, because there's another piece of disinformation that everyone knows, and we have talked about it before. You know, the reminiscent of Genghis Khan, and how the Secretary of State has been a propaganda tool, a very important propaganda tool. And now, where is he? Is he a tool in the hands? Is he a hapless dupe? Who is he? We'll talk about that tonight at 5 o'clock. Thank you so much for coming in and being a part of the program. And the book is really something that you need to read. It is Disinformation. It's available everywhere now. Former spy chief reveals secret strategies for undermining freedom, attacking religion, and promoting terrorism. Disinformation.